Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this snowy Wednesday for the next VECAN winter webinar. My name is Dan Fingus, and I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for Vermont Natural Resources Council. Welcome to the Vermont Energy Education Program's Community Workshop webinar. This is a part of our series of winter webinars that provides education, tools, and support to local energy leaders. I hope you can join us in the future webinars, including a webinar featuring window dressers on February 28th and a How to Develop a Thermal Energy Network webinar on March 13th. Turning to today's webinar, we're lucky to have Vermont Energy Education Program with us today to talk about how they've built off their expertise running workshops in schools to create community workshops. Let me introduce today's presenter. Sophia Donforth is the Executive Director of VEEP with a master's degree in teaching from UVM and previous work as a middle school teacher, community organizer, and executive director of a parent-child center. Sophia brings her passion for education and organization to her work at VEEP. Welcome, Sophia. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for making some time in the middle of what is surely a busy day for lots of us. And we'll take the sunshine as we get it. So I'm gonna start by putting up these slides here, and Dan, go ahead and tell me if anything's gone amiss, but I think we should be good. Folks can see here.
Yep.
We're going to talk about climate education for all and VEEP's new community workshops today. And just to sort of frame this, I've got our mission statement right here at the top. Our job is to build a deep understanding of energy and climate through education, inspiring and empowering people to take action for increased sustainability in our communities, economy, and environment. And VEEP has been doing this work around this mission, really focused on schools for the last slightly over 40 years at this point. And we have some new offerings, and that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. So what have we been up to? Typically, VEEP is bringing hands-on workshops to students, loaning out some equipment and lesson plans to teachers across the state of Vermont, and supporting teachers through professional development to become more confident in teaching about energy and climate. We also host a wonderful program for high schoolers called the Youth Climate Leaders Academy, which helps them build the skills they need to make change and take climate action in their own communities. Perhaps you have seen one of these wonderful posters spread out somewhere on a library or school wall, or perhaps you've ridden the energy bike at a fair at some point. We have a well-known person here in our photo, but lots of folks have made use of this bike over the years. I'd be happy to share more about these school-based programs at the end of today's gathering if folks have questions, but today I'm here to talk about some new offerings that we have for adults. And so I want to start with a question that we often ask kids in schools. Take a look at this picture here. How long do you think it would take a gas-powered car to fill this 12-foot-long emissions bag? For folks who haven't seen this before, this is an enormous long plastic sleeve that we hook up to the exhaust pipe of a car, and we have the driver turn it on, and we time it to see how long the emissions fills up. So I can see folks are chiming in via the poll that Dan's put out. Thanks, Dan. I'm seeing 10 out of 10 answered. And I think on the basis of how many folks are here, I'm going to go ahead and hit share results. And let's see here. Dan, can folks see that?
They should be able to, yeah.
All right. So we've got, here are our estimates. I've got at least one person who's saying 15 seconds to fill this long tube. And 6 people, it looks like, responding 30 seconds, and 3 people at 1 minute. So I can tell I'm talking to folks who are in the know, because when we pose this question, we get a whole lot of answers that are more along the lines of 5 minutes or 8 minutes. A typical gas-powered car is going to take a minute, maybe just over, to fill this bag. A hybrid, like the Prius I drive, takes 2 minutes because it's using electricity some of the time, and 15 seconds for a pickup truck or a typical SUV. So there's just a little gauge there. This is a question we ask students because it gets them thinking. And it's a question we ask adults too, because it gets them thinking. And it's a way for us to start a conversation about what we might be able to do differently. So I'm willing to believe that many of the folks on this call know plenty of alternatives to driving single occupancy gas-powered cars. Right, we often talk about carpooling and bus riding and walking and biking instead, or switching to driving an electric vehicle. And I want to invite folks to just take a moment to brainstorm. You can put these things in the chat. Just tell me, what are some things you think your town or your community could do to make some of those alternatives more possible? I'll see if I can set this up where I can see the chat too. Go ahead and just pop some stuff in. We know what the alternatives are, but what would make it easier? Someone said bike lanes. That's an excellent suggestion. Charging stations for EVs. Yep. Better sidewalks. Oh, someone's pointing out there are seasonal bus routes to support some of the ski areas, but then they don't operate in the summers. So maybe there are places where we want to think about how to extend that into the rest of the year. Traffic calming measures. Yep. And I'm seeing some suggestions too around some changes we could make policy-wise that might help us out, right? So banning the sale of two-cycle engines like California has. Someone's chipping in also, let's see, multi-use paths between towns and villages and denser housing. All right, so here's what I'm taking away. You folks know your stuff. These are all great suggestions that would make a really big difference in our communities towards making all of those other forms of transportation more feasible for people. Now, I start with this question to get people thinking, and in large part because it's an illustration of what VEEP is trying to do. When we get somebody's attention, we want to give them some information, we want to get them thinking about it, and then we want to, as quickly as possible, move them towards some sorts of solutions. And this is in large part because of what we have learned doing this climate education all of these years. Here's what we've learned. It's really hard to pay attention to things that we can't see. The climate crisis is getting more visible all the time here in Vermont, but despite the flooding this summer, there's very few of us who are going to think about the climate crisis every time we get in our car to drive someplace. And so that's the point of a weird demo like this. Taking the kids out into the parking lot to show them what happens with this emissions bag is a great way to really make visible what is usually invisible. We've also learned that people are more motivated to do something when they are asking the question themselves or when they have a problem that they want to solve. And that's why I started with a question for you folks today. We also know that it's not enough to learn about climate change. We also have to learn about the solutions and practice working towards those solutions. It's not enough to say, oh yeah, we should all carpool. We actually have to do stuff to make sure that that's actually feasible for everybody. Maybe this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Assumptions are dangerous, especially when we're talking about climate change. If we assume that everybody that we're talking to knows how that works and why it's happening, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And if we assume that everyone can just make different choices than they currently are, that's often an unfair assumption as well, because for many, the economic reality is that they can't. That's a big part of why we're trying to make these adult workshops available to folks as well. We hear this one a lot. How much can I actually do as one person? The answer is a whole lot. There's a good deal that individuals can do, but we can do even more as communities. And that's why in the question I just asked you about transportation, I had us focus not on what can you do as one person, but what can we do as a town or community to remove some of those obstacles. And lastly, and this is significant, the organizing that we all need to do to mitigate climate change will actually make our communities more resilient. If you're spending time trying to figure out better transportation for your community, you're meeting your neighbors. And when the next flood comes, you'll know those folks already. So that's all to the good. Our goal with these workshops geared at adults is to close the gap between awareness and action. We all know that we should drive less, but when the bus system is easy to use, or the bike lane is wide enough and the weather's not nasty, or the walk is short, or the carpool is with a good friend, suddenly we're able to make choices that are better for the environment and for our community. So let's make it easy. Let's give everyone accessible information and concrete things that they can immediately do with their new information. So here's what we're proposing. We have a series of 5 workshops that give adults a chance to do some fun hands-on experiments and explore topics related to energy and climate change. And the way we envision this working, we've been testing it out this school year, actually. We started over the summer and have done several of these this winter. Someone in town agrees to host. Maybe that's the library, maybe that's the energy committee. We've been doing these largely in libraries and in town halls so far. VEEP sends you an educator with all the equipment for one of these workshops and runs the workshop. And so that's the chance for people to gain a new understanding of something. And we also connect you up with what we're calling an action partner, someone who has either a local or a state initiative to make some changes that might be relevant to your town or community. Now, if you already have something going on locally, we're happy to amplify that. We had a great experience with the folks in Guilford this summer who are working on weatherization. So we came in and did our weatherization workshop, and then they had a series of things they were already doing in town that they wanted to talk up, and that was a wonderful fit. But if you don't have something that's already on your mind, we have a list of action partners, folks who are excited to bring some new tools to towns so that folks can engage in that action right away. So that's what we're planning. And to talk a little bit about what these workshops actually are and what sorts of things folks will learn over the course of them, I want to ask you another question. And this, I think Dan is going to show up in a poll as well. And folks could just say, who knows what Vermont's biggest sources of carbon emissions are? Here it is. We got a couple different categories. So go ahead and cast your ballot. All right, we've got some great responses here. Click share results and hopefully folks can see. We've got a bimodal distribution. Well done. 10 people chiming in that transportation is our highest emitter, and 3 folks saying, nope, it's buildings. And I will say there's truth to both of those, but I'm glad to see that folks are in the know on this front too. So we've got a graphic here. I hope people can see, with many thanks to the folks at Energy Action Network, plus a pile of other folks that we've been chatting with about this data. Currently, transportation is our highest emitter, with building thermal close behind. And depending on where you get your data from and how you crunch your numbers, you'll have slightly different percentages on this, but this trend is definitely true. So VEEP has designed workshops to help folks get to these ideas about what can we do in the transportation sector and in building thermal, and also in electricity, because that's been a place that VEEP has been doing programs for a long time. And if we're going to start electrifying all kinds of things, we need to be sure that we're having cleaner electricity production as well. So that's where our workshops focus. And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about these 5 that we've developed. So as you can imagine, the transportation one is top of mind. That's why I started with our emissions bag example. Transportation Reworks is a workshop that focuses on the question, how can we get from place to place using less gas? We start with this excellent demonstration in the parking lot. We spend some time looking at this poster displayed here that measures the energy impact and the emissions impact of different ways of getting around. We spend a bunch of time looking at electric vehicles, challenges, benefits, how to make that work. And then it depends on where we are and what sort of action partner is in the room. There are times where the electric vehicle conversation is really what the focus becomes because that's what's relevant for that particular area. In other places, we spend a lot more time talking about bus options because there's a robust bus system. In some places, we wind up talking specifically about how kids get to and from school because that's the thing that the town has chosen to focus on. One of my favorite parts of this is a scavenger hunt that we have people do using public transit apps to see whether they can get from point A to point B without using their car. And the data is really telling. In some places, it lets us know exactly where the bus is not meeting their needs. And in other places, folks find out that there actually is a bus line that would make a difference for them that they didn't know about. Another one that we have lined up is called home heat transfer. You can see the kids here using a hair dryer. They're testing multiple different insulation materials. And so with this workshop, we have folks investigate hands-on themselves what materials work best to block heat transfer and how air sealing works in our houses and how those two things need to work together in order for us to be comfortable in the winter and not be wasting a whole lot of energy. We have a new offering called home electrification. I don't have pictures of folks doing this yet because it's being rolled out in just a couple of weeks for the first time. This workshop focuses on the question, how will electrifying your home be better for your wallet and for the environment? And we help attendees figure out which areas of their homes might be a good place for electrification, what sort of savings there might be in terms of emissions, and then ideally having an action partner there who can talk about what might be saved in terms of the money. And that's a place where we really lean on organizations like Efficiency Vermont, which can tell folks all about the sorts of rebates and incentives that are available as they go into making some of those changes. This workshop does include a station that breaks down how a heat pump works, and that is something we're really excited to be able to offer folks. The fourth one is called the grid. Plain and simple, it's to help folks understand how we make electricity and where our power comes from and how the grid works. It's something that we're hearing more and more about as we move towards electrification. You can see the kids here have done this in a high school setting where we have boxes representing the various buildings in town. They've wired them together. And the challenge here is for participants to figure out how to manage the increased demand for electricity based on the various sources of electricity that they have. The photo here on the left shows our oil, natural gas, and coal, which we use when demand is high, but we also hook these up with wind turbines and solar panels and all sorts of different things so that people can see in real time what happens when we have multiple different sources providing our electricity and how best to manage those. And lastly, one called Modeling Climate Science. This one is less focused on a particular solution and therefore a particular action step, but we did find talking to people as we designed these that this thing that we have been offering for students is something that a lot of adults were interested in learning as well. So you can see here we have a model. Students are looking at two soda bottles, one of which has carbon dioxide and one of which does not. And we've turned a heat lamp on and they get to measure every minute for 8 minutes to see what happens to the temperature. So you can see in real time the impact of carbon dioxide on our atmosphere in this model, which just leads to a level of understanding that not everybody gets when they just look at a picture of it or read about it in a book. So let me return to my example. I was telling you that in Guilford this summer, they were trying to raise awareness about weatherization. And so we brought them the home heat transfer workshop. Here's how that worked. I've got one more poll for you. We brought these 4 little cardboard houses in, and we set them up, and we asked folks the question I'm about to ask you. Which of these houses would you rather live in during a Vermont winter? I've marked them A, B, C, and D on the roofs. I hope that's visible enough for folks. Which one looks like the place that's going to keep you cozier? Seeing some votes for D and some votes for C. All right, and B as well. Excellent. And so I guess I'd like to hear some reasons why folks chose what they did. You can put that in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute. There aren't very many of us today. Go ahead and just let me know. Someone who chose D, what's your rationale behind that? Popping into the chat to see if there are answers there. That's a fine place. But you can also just unmute and let me know. All right, D appears to be insulated and sealed. Fewer building penetrations. Okay, right? So we have fewer openings in that one. And someone else is letting us know that house C seems smaller and the dark color might absorb heat. So those are great things to pay attention to. And another comment about the size, that B appears to be insulated and slightly smaller. Well, I love to see this and just sort of hear people's thinking as we go through. This is a great exercise really for all of us, I think, to be able to hear what other folks were thinking as well. What we do with these is we put a jar of boiling water inside each of the houses with a temperature probe, and we track the temperature over time. And as that boiling water cools down, we find that some of those jars of water cool down much more quickly than others, depending on the house that is surrounding it. So typically, house D, which has thicker walls, it's a little hard to see in the photo, I think, made of foam and well sealed, holds the heat the longest. And house A, which is thin cardboard and has a number of holes where the air gets in, just below those windows there, those cuts, does not. That's the one that cools off fastest. Interestingly, B and C, it's sort of a toss-up. It depends on the conditions. So B has very thick walls, but is not sealed. And so in a situation where there's a good deal of wind, if air currents are moving around the classroom where we are, that one will actually cool off considerably faster. Whereas C, which just has the cardboard for insulation, not as thick as the foam, however, it's air sealed in a space where the air is moving a lot, C will do better. So that in and of itself brings up an interesting conversation to have with folks, especially when we're thinking about all the different facets of weatherization and whether we're in a space to be able to do, a whole new insulation setup right now, or sometimes there are cheaper ways for us to do air sealing right off the bat. So it's a worthwhile conversation to have with people. We just kind of break that down.
Sophia, there was a question in the chat about whether the white floors, and is that just the foam, or is that something, is it supposed to be up? When you look at the picture of the houses, you can see the edge.
Yep. So it's foam that has sort of a foil-like covering on it, but that's just how the foam came to us. So we're trying to show, and it's a little tricky in the model and then even trickier on the photo, but we're trying to show both a difference in thickness of those walls, and also houses B and D have a thick layer of that foam underneath. And so that's like to represent an insulated basement, basically. So we brought those houses to Guilford after a pizza dinner. with the kids playing in a corner with the local volunteer. Attendees explored different insulation materials. They tested how good they were at blocking that heat transfer. They examined those same model houses to see what was going on with the air sealing. And then we heard from a local community member about the steps that they had taken to do some weatherization of their own home. And then we had a representative from Window Dressers who was there to talk up the community build that was happening in the fall. And so the folks who came to this session were able to sign up for window inserts that same night through the Window Dressers program and take home some flyers from Efficiency Vermont about weatherization programs and incentives that might be relevant to their homes. I want to give that example because I know many of you are probably thinking about this for what would this look like in my town? And it's going to be different everywhere, right? Maybe there's a community action agency near you that's trying to get more low-income households to sign up for a weatherization program. And in that case, we offer the same workshop alongside someone from their program who can speak to the specifics of eligibility and how that all works. And in a case like that, we would recommend doing something like giving out gift cards to a grocery store for all the attendees by way of an incentive to attend. We do have some grant funding that we could use to help in a situation like that. Or maybe there's a town that's considering weatherization of its municipal buildings, and this workshop is a way to start a conversation about what changes would have the biggest impact on energy savings for the town. And so in that case, it's maybe less about the individuals and their homes and more about a shared space that the town wants to tackle together. But we see this workshop as a way to level the playing field and give everyone a starting point to be able to participate in that conversation. The slide I have up here is just a brief list of the folks that we've talked to be action partners for some of these. We've got some wonderful materials coming to us from Efficiency Vermont, both around weatherization and the Drive Electric campaign. Window Dressers, as I mentioned, and thanks Allison for tuning in, has been a wonderful partner to us this fall in a couple of different weatherization workshops that we've put on. Local Motion has a series of different resources that they offer to towns that are looking at changes to infrastructure around bicycles and pedestrians. We've got some partners at the community action agencies and also within the Vermont Clean Cities Coalition. And then I've just added your friends and neighbors. It's been really telling to me what an impact having someone at the workshop who has already made some of these changes in their own home or in their own vehicle or transportation habits has had in terms of sharing that information neighbor to neighbor. We did an event in East Corinth recently where VEEP put on its transportation workshop. We had someone from Drive Electric to talk about what was available there, but then really the key to all of this were the local neighbors who already drive EVs that were able to talk about their experience and what that was like in this area very specifically. So how does this work? Here's what we can offer you. We'll work with you to pick a theme for your event. We'll identify and connect you with some potential action partners on that theme if you don't already have somebody in mind. And we'll provide a sample kit for promoting your event. We have flyers that are already made up that folks can just put in date, time, location, and stick those up on the community bulletin board or share them around online. We'll bring all the necessary equipment and put on a great workshop, and then we can provide some follow-up materials as appropriate, such as some of our posters or in some cases, energy efficiency kits. We have a number of different things that we can offer on that front. To make this work, we need local partners, and that's all of you. So what we look for our hosts to be able to do is, first and foremost, find a space for the program that includes adequate space for us to move around and some seating. Ensure accessibility for their audience. This is going to vary really greatly depending where in the state you are and who it is that you're trying to get to attend this event. So we're thinking about things like what time of day and what sort of a day is best. What kind of a location is it, and does it have sufficient parking, or is it accessible via public transportation if that's relevant? And then, and this is a big one, offering childcare or translation or food or transportation as appropriate. Again, this matters a whole lot and varies greatly depending on the audience that you're going for. And I do see some questions regarding what this costs, and I will get there, but I will note that we have a grant from the Vermont Low-Income Trust for Electricity that allows us to help out with the costs for some of that accessibility piece. So that's something we're happy to talk with people about as well. And then lastly, and this is a big one, promote the event locally to ensure some good attendance. We have staff scattered all across Vermont, but we're all part-time, and we don't know what's the best mode of getting the word out in your particular community. And so that's where we want to be sure that the hosts are doing their homework to make sure that there's a good crew of folks in the room when we come out. In terms of the cost, these workshops cost us roughly $500 to put on. We have some grant funds that allow us to offer them at low or no cost to folks who need that. And we just ask, as you are considering booking one of these, whether there's something going on that your town could pitch in on. Like, I know that lots of folks are applying for those MERP grants right now. This seems like a great thing for that. Anyone who is able to chip in, that's going to allow us to stretch our grant funds further. But we were really pleased to have VLight support, which enables us to bring these for free to anybody who needs them. And the last thing I would just say in closing before I move into question and answer mode here is to just be aware of time frame. Because we are such a part-time staff, it's going to be important to be a little bit flexible and patient around scheduling these. We started piloting these this fall, and we've seen an explosion in interest. So that's great that people want to get the word out and have us come in, and it just means that we're taking our time scheduling them a few at a time over the course of the coming months, so that we don't overwhelm the staff. And with that, I'll put our link up. You can learn more and sign up at this wonderful website. And just a reminder to take action. Let's do something and let's make some of these changes. So I'm going to pop over into the chat now, and Dan, feel free to chime in if I'm missing things. And see if we can get some of these questions answered.
Yeah, currently seeing 3 unanswered questions. Do you want me to ask you those?
I think I've got it now. They're visible. Okay. Thank you. So somebody asked, can you do an outdoor venue? Yes, weather dependent. I think my only concern there would be whether or not we have the electricity hookup that we need. Some of what we do doesn't require that. Some of our workshops are very electricity dependent. So we would need to talk about that in terms of a power source and you know, all the usual things about being outside and whether stuff is blowing away, but I think we could make a plan around that. For adults, what's the ideal audience size? We love to be talking to no more than 20, maybe 25 people at a time, because these workshops are designed to be hands-on. That's an ideal size because it lets everybody get a chance to actually work with the materials and the equipment themselves. If you have a larger group, we would probably just want to make sure that we could send additional staff members out so that there would still be sufficient feedback for folks, and we could bring more equipment in a case like that. But 20 to 25 is sort of a good range for us. And then let's see. There's a question, have you ever done an event with 2 partners? For example, if a venue had 2 rooms and you could do a rotation of groups. We haven't seen this happen yet. We do have an event scheduled later this spring where the town of Hartford is doing a day-long thing, and we've been booked to do 2. So we're doing the weatherization workshop, I think, in the morning, and then home electrification in the afternoon. So that's certainly something, you know, if you've got 2 themes that you want to hit and you have a setup like that where it's a day-long thing, we certainly could. Again, it's going to be staff dependent. So I would need to send 2 people out if those 2 workshops were happening simultaneously. So we would just have to talk about the specifics.
And Sophia, I'm guessing and I don't know if this person wants to come off to ask any more specifics. If it was something where you might be one of the presenters and another group might be in the other part of the workshop, you're willing to coordinate with other groups where you might be running a room and they might be running a room.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. And then what's this one? Some members of Chittenden's energy committees tabled at the Champlain Valley Fair last year. They're looking for an organizer to do this again this summer. Is that the kind of thing VEEP might consider? We have attended a number of energy fairs in years past, mostly talking up the school programming that we offered at that point. We don't really have the staff capacity to send somebody to all of the energy fairs out there. And in our experience, that 2 to 5 minute interaction with somebody at the table doesn't really give us the chance to get into the education that we want to do. So that's why I'm hesitant about that piece. But if I've missed something there and there's sort of an opportunity for a workshop to be put on, I'm certainly happy to follow up with you later if you want to send me an email or something. That would be great. And then we have a school question. Part of my job entails working with schools, and the other half involves providing education and outreach programming within the larger community. Would you consider doing an event during the day for a school and then following up with an event for the general public? Absolutely. That's happened a couple of times in January, actually. We're happy to chat with you about that. We had a library that booked us to come out and do an adult workshop and actually borrowed a kit to use with the children in a different room at the same time. And that was how they chose to provide the childcare piece. So everybody was working on the same themes, but at different levels. That's all I'm seeing on this list at this point. Dan, have I missed anything?
Not that I've seen.
All right. So I guess barring other questions, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat because I do think that there probably will be other things that come up afterwards, and I'm happy to respond that way. I'd also just encourage you to spend some time on our website, which has been recently redone and I think is doing a better job of describing each of the specific programs. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sophia. Really appreciate you and the work that VEEP's doing and bringing this resource, this, either low cost or free resource out to everyone is really important. I really appreciate it. I just put in the chat again, the upcoming VECAN winter webinars. We have window dressers. I see Allison from Window Dressers here today. We have window dressers in 2 weeks. And then on March 13th, how to develop a thermal energy network. That's exciting. There's a new toolkit through Energy Action Network for developing thermal energy networks for municipalities. And so we're going to be digging into that and really learning about that. I hope folks will join us for both of those webinars. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.